Hello, I'm Laneta Dorflinger, the Director of Product Development and Introduction at FHI 360. And today I'm joined by Mark Barone, the Deputy Director for Expand Method Choice at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've come together for a discussion being sponsored by the Contraceptive Technology Innovation Exchange, or the CTI Exchange, which is a platform intended to grow collaboration and knowledge sharing in this area. And this discussion is part of our Beginning with the End in Mind series. So Mark, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today. We've known each other for a number of years, and it's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you about contraceptive research and development and introduction, and about how you see technologies advancing over the next decade.
Thanks so much, Laneta, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion today. And I also would just like to thank FHI 360 and the CTI Exchange for putting this really interesting series together. One of the things that I hope that this series will help is to strengthen the contraceptive R&D ecosystem, which is really critical and something that the foundation is committed to supporting. And I think it's crucial as a field that we find ways to foster research collaborations and to cultivate additional and sustainable resources, and really importantly, to expand the talent pool of scientists that can bring next generation ideas to life. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Absolutely. I really echo your point about bringing new talent, expanding the talent pool in this space. It's so important. And so your title at the foundation is Deputy Director for Method Choice, and the position was actually created within the framework of launching the new family planning strategy of the foundation. So can you tell us a little bit about how your role fits into the overall strategy?
Sure. Maybe let me start just in very broad terms by describing the foundation's new strategy, which was just approved in January. And then hopefully it'll be a little clearer how the Expand Method Choice work fits into that. So the goal of our family planning program is to accelerate voluntary use of modern contraception among women and girls, with a particular focus on low and middle income countries, and doing this by increasing demand and then helping to satisfy that demand for contraception, with our long-term vision being that every woman and girl can access the method that's right for her, when and where she needs it. And so our strategy has three main components. The first is the Expand Method Choice. So we'll come back to that in a moment, since that's the, as you indicated, the part of the strategy that I oversee. The second is optimizing family planning interventions by testing promising approaches and building evidence for what are the most effective and efficient interventions that really meet the needs and the preferences of more women and girls, and also that are scalable, which then leads into the third part of our strategy, which is driving impact at scale at the local level, but also regionally and globally. So these kinds of proven solutions can be taken to scale. And then those three areas are very importantly supported by work to ensure that decisions can be informed by good quality data, and also supported by an advocacy program that is really focused on helping to generate sustainable financing at the country level, to building political leadership for family planning and this kind of research, and positioning family planning firmly within the broader health and development agendas, as opposed to, kind of vertical programming. And I would just mention that for people who are interested in more details about our strategy, Laneta, one of your podcasts in the Deeper Look series was Ann Stars, our director of the Foundation of the Family Planning Program, talking about the new strategy. So people could look that up if they're interested in more detail about the strategy overall. But then let me then come back to the expand method choice component, which is, the foundation is really making a big commitment in this area, and we're allocating nearly 50% of the entire family planning budget to this work. So that's close to $140 million a year. And, I think that most of the listeners are, familiar with this, but despite the great gains in use of modern contraception over the past 50 years, there are still more than 200 million women and girls around the world who don't want to get pregnant right now, but are not using contraception. Of course, there are a range of reasons for that, but one of the big reasons is that the current methods don't meet their needs or lifestyles in one way or another. So given this, our Expand Method Choice initiative, in that initiative, we are ramping up investments in research and development. So R&D, for those who may not be familiar with that term, to create new and better contraceptive options that are informed by a deep understanding of women's and girls' needs and preferences, and addressing those issues that prevent them from using contraception. And so this R&D work involves both improving on some of the existing methods to the extent that's possible, and then also working to develop novel contraceptive products. That's much earlier stage work, but in that work we have a particular focus on supporting programs developing non-hormonal methods that we hope will, in particular, be able to lead to fewer side effects than the currently available methods. And then the other main focus of the Expand Method Choice Initiative is working with countries and funders and other partners to support introduction and scale up of currently available methods that are limited in their availability and use in low and middle income countries, and helping to support the supply chain so that those methods are manufactured and procured and distributed in a more efficient and maybe cost-effective manner than they currently are, in helping to prevent stockouts at the clinics and drug shops and other places where people get to go, or where people go for those methods. And so that includes supporting some work around increasing the availability and access of the self-injectable Depo-Provera, and also the hormonal IUD, as well as this idea of reimagining some existing products. So, for example, working on the idea of rebranding the emergency contraceptive pill as a pericoital method for women who have infrequent sex, and they could just rely on that as their family planning method. So I hope that gives people a little bit of understanding about the strategy overall, and then a little bit more about the Expand Method Choice work that I'm involved in.
Thank you. That was a fantastic summary, and it's really exciting to hear how much the foundation has expanded. Speaking of expanding method choice, expanding their contributions and their commitment to this area. It's just such an important thing, and we're so grateful. You've had a very interesting career. You were originally trained as a veterinarian. And I think the audience would really enjoy hearing how you got initially involved in contraceptive research and innovation, and maybe a little bit about what your journey was to get to the point where you were selected for this position at the foundation.
When people find out I'm a veterinarian, they always ask me that question. I suppose I would say that I've had a bit of an unusual career path given my educational background. But prior to my veterinary degree, I did complete a master's program in reproductive physiology. So I did have an interest and experience in reproduction research. It was just with animals at that time. And after I graduated from vet school, I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., where I worked in the reproduction program, developing techniques for artificial reproduction with endangered species. And at that time, since I was living in Washington, I had some friends who were AAAS fellows, so the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And I became interested in talking to them about the idea of working at the policy level. And so I applied for one of those positions. And although it wasn't my original plan, I have to admit, I ended up with a position in what was then called the Office of Population at USAID, now the Office of Population and Reproductive Health, working with projects to develop new contraceptive methods. And, I'll just mention that for some of your listeners who might not know, Laneta was also a AAAS fellow, and in fact, had the same position I have. I guess you say, I don't know, one fellowship class previously. So there was a person, a different fellow between us. But and so those years at USAID were my transition from working on reproduction with animals to working on reproduction with people. Although I do sometimes say that people are animals too, which sometimes I think we forget. But after my fellowship, and maybe a little bit to my surprise, I ended up with a job offer at what was then known as AVSC, now known as Gender Health. And I worked there on a lot of different things, but including conducting clinical trials on various aspects of contraception and other areas of reproductive health, and supporting work on introduction of new approaches and methods in low resource settings around the world. And I spent 24 years in Gender Health, and I left there almost 4 years ago now, I suppose. But I spent 3 years at the Population Council's Center for Biomedical Research, conducting some research on a male circumcision device, and also supporting work on development of various contraceptives and multipurpose prevention technologies. And then this past May, I just came to the foundation. So I think I can still say very new in my position there. And I just wanted to add one more thing that I was thinking about that might be useful for, listeners younger in their careers. I don't know about you, Laneta, but I never envisioned that this, would be my career path. I mean, I never envisioned working at the Gates Foundation, just like I never envisioned applying for a AAAS fellowship or spending my career working in, I say human public health. Sometimes people forget that there's public health in animals too. But, so I just think it's important to be open to, a path that you maybe hadn't thought about in advance, and that really interesting opportunities arise, and that it might not be the direction you thought you'd take, but it could take you down a really interesting and fruitful path. I feel really lucky to have had a really satisfying career, even though it was not in any way what I had envisioned originally.
I think I had exactly the same experience, Mark. When I decided to apply to the AAAS Fellows Program, I had full intention of going back and working in the lab and having an academic career. And it is so interesting that, something just flipped a switch in me that got me very excited about staying, and have just had the good fortune of being drawn into this field, for sure. We've had exciting ups and downs over time, but if you could, can you put your thinking cap on and think about what might be the most exciting thing for you right now working in the contraceptive R&D field? Or the top couple, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I say more than one?
You can have three, even if you want.
Okay, good. Let's see how it goes. One of the really exciting things, I think, I think this is a really exciting time to be working in contraceptive R&D. There are amazing advances in all sorts of areas of science and manufacturing, advances that can really be leveraged for contraceptive R&D, and that can help us discover and develop new contraceptives that, can better meet, users' needs. And so I think that is a really exciting opportunity for us. And those advances are already being applied to contraceptive R&D. And I hope that is an increasing trend. And I'm also really excited and encouraged that the family planning field is embracing the concept of self-care, and something that is happening more broadly in medicine. I mean, I really think COVID-19, this whole pandemic, has shown us the value of self-care in the family planning arena, since the current models really rely heavily on medical providers and facilities to provide contraceptives. And, maybe everybody probably knows that self-care is the idea that individuals are more actively engaged in preventing disease and maintaining their own health without necessarily involving the formal health system. But to move towards that self-care idea in the family planning field, we need more methods that can be placed directly within women and girls' hands and empower them to make their own contraceptive decisions in their own time. And so that's why one of the new focuses of our family planning strategy is on methods that can be self-administered, so that women and girls don't need to rely on healthcare providers who are often overworked or going to those very crowded health facilities that we've all, that many of us have visited in the past, and that they can also start using the methods and stop using them, when they want. And one other, or maybe two other things that are exciting to me. Something that's really important to me and very exciting to me is that we are really seriously exploring ways that we can shift more of this work to low and middle income countries, this work around contraceptive R&D, in strengthening the ability of scientists in those settings to carry out more of this work, which, relates to the idea of the talent ecosystem as well, and finding more scientists and helping support scientists in Africa, for example. Right. Your role. And then the last thing I would just say, which is, just from a personal perspective, I'm really excited to be here at the foundation where I, can play a role in helping to advance this work. And the last thing I'll say about this is I'm known for saying sometimes that I'm most excited about the possibility of something that I couldn't even imagine at the moment, because I think that in the next, or I hope that in the next, 5 to 10 years, there will be methods that we never thought about, just like there are now methods that 20 years ago, nobody would have thought about. So I think that is also something that's really exciting.
I totally agree with you on that last point. Like, what we don't know might be the most exciting thing a decade from now, which is in and of itself really exciting. Well, I mentioned earlier, and remind the audience, that this interview is part of a series that FHI is hosting on the CTI Exchange called Beginning with the End in Mind. And for those of us who work in global public health and family planning, as we do, really have, as we're working in the R&D space, we're interested not only in things that are acceptable, but also, as you mentioned, accessible, but importantly, affordable, and affordable to those populations that we're targeting. And so maybe you could speak a little bit to this issue of how the foundation approaches its areas of support around these issues of both not just acceptable and accessible, but affordable. Are there things that you do or that you put in place that sort of have a check or a check and balance for the grantees that you're supporting?
Laneta, in some ways, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about working to develop new and better contraceptive options that are informed by a deep understanding of women and girls' preferences and the reasons they're not using methods now. And of course, it also relates to men if we're talking about development of male contraceptives. And that having that deep understanding is really the underlying principle of the Expand Method Choice Initiative. And, I think that for me, there are keys to to keep in mind around important questions to ask around the end user. And I guess these are the sorts of questions we ask ourselves in relation to potential grants we might give or areas of work we might support. And the first one is, what are the needs of the end users and what attributes do they really value? And importantly, what trade-offs are they willing to make? I think that we could all agree that we would love some contraceptive that has no side effects, that it's 100% effective, that it's really easy to use, that it's really, really inexpensive, that you could use it discreetly if you wanted to, that the minute you stop using it, you could become pregnant, all of these ideal characteristics. But certainly right now, that's not feasible. Maybe someday, but not right now, that's not. And so the question is, which of all these characteristics, what are most important to the potential users? Keeping in mind, of course, that women and girls and men as well, that their priorities and their preferences change over time. So we really want to know that methods we're supporting are going to meet the needs of women and help them with those trade-offs. So that kind of information is really valuable for us. And then how do we ensure, you mentioned access, and so how do we ensure that those methods are going to be convenient for women to access and to use? And that also then, of course, is in line with the whole model of self-care, and at least some of the options that we're working towards developing would be totally under the user's control. So they can start and, of course, very importantly, stop using the methods as they like. And I already had mentioned, and something else that we keep in mind, of course, are issues around supply chain and how can we help ensure that there's an adequate supply and help reduce stockouts, and for example, that those products would have an adequate shelf life and that they don't require refrigeration or something that's going to be really challenging in the settings that are most of interest to us. And then, you mentioned price, and so of course, that is obviously, especially for the markets that we're interested in, something that we need to think about right from the start. Is it likely that this method will be affordable, not only to users, but also to the healthcare system? Because in many settings, it's the government or the healthcare system more broadly that's purchasing methods. And so it's, important to be sure that when a user has to purchase it herself, it's affordable, but also that it's affordable for the system more broadly.
I think that's a really important thing that I think the foundation has emphasized for the last few years, and their global access commitment and strategies to try to both select products that will be potentially less expensive, but also ensuring that those partners are working on, trying to keep the cost down. It's always challenging because innovation, you're trading off the excitement of innovation and the potential for a big private market with the need for the public sector that we serve, for sure.
It's one of the challenges.
Yeah, one of the big challenges, and it's been a challenge for all the years we've been working, hasn't it? I wonder if you think, I think a number of things are changing now that are helping to grow our sector, and even things like better donor collaboration, I could imagine. But are there other things that you can think about in the context of this sector growing and changing that will really help us get to where we want to be in the next decade?
Yeah, I think, Laneta, so as I mentioned, one of the biggest reasons that women and girls that don't want to get pregnant now are not using a contraceptive method is because it's not meeting their needs. One of the main reasons for that are side effects and health concerns of many, that women and girls have of many of the currently available methods, which, of course, are hormonal methods to a large extent. And the other big area is infrequent sex. So women and girls who are not having sex that often and are not interested in using these continuous methods because they don't feel that, of course, meets their needs. And so in some ways, many of the currently available methods are thankfully meeting a lot of people's needs, but still not meeting a large number of people's needs. And I think we recognize in the field that we need more effective, convenient, and importantly, affordable non-hormonal contraceptives that we hope would reduce or eliminate many of these side effects, in particular, bleeding-related side effects, which is one of the main things that deter women and girls, or deter women and girls from using modern methods, and also having more effective methods for those women that have infrequent sex and want a method that, we call these on-demand methods that they can use around the time of sex. And so something else that excites me and that I think is useful to mention here is that we have a whole drug discovery portfolio, which are very early stage products or very early stage work, really, that we hope will 15 to 20 years down the road lead to some sort of transformative contraceptive. These are the kinds of ideas that we don't even know about yet, but that might be more responsive to the user's needs and their preferences, and mitigate side effects, improve continuation, and improve satisfaction. And this area of contraceptive drug discovery is really very under-resourced. And so, which is another reason that I'm excited that we are investing in this. Yeah. And it's under-resourced in part because it's really risky, yet another challenge, that, most of these projects, the just unfortunate reality is they will fail, that they're never going to actually lead to a commercially viable product for one reason or another. That's just the nature of this type of work. But it is also a place where the foundation can complement work of of others and our partners by leveraging our resources to tackle challenges that we might be better placed to address than others. So in this instance, we're willing to take risks that maybe other people can't take, or in some cases aren't willing to take. This is an area where we see that we can provide some support. And, just talking about that under-resourcing, it's not just the drug discovery area that's under-resourced. The entire contraceptive R&D field is underfunded. And if you think about it, contraceptive technologies have not really advanced at the pace like other therapeutic areas because of this chronic underfunding in the CT R&D space. And one of those, I know, little bits of data are that in 2018, the expenditures on R&D were about $112 million for contraception, compared to $1.4 billion for products related to HIV and AIDS. And so, and I don't even know what the numbers might be for things like cancer and cardiac related conditions. But, and as I previously mentioned, there are not enough scientists and researchers focusing on this field, or resources from pharmaceutical companies that are being directed towards contraceptive R&D, although there are some signs that investments are improving in a few large pharmaceutical companies, which is very encouraging. And there are more startups and smaller healthcare companies and biotech firms that are focusing on women's health and, moving into contraceptive R&D. And so that's all, I think, really encouraging. And then you commented on coordination. And so I would just say that, I think we knew before, but now COVID-19 has really, made us think even more about it. But with shifting donor priorities and country priorities and limited funding for this type of work, that now more than ever, the foundation and the entire field really needs to operate smartly with the resources that we have. And so we will continue to work with the two other major donors that support contraceptive R&D, the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NICHD, and also USAID, to collaborate and to coordinate to try to maximize the impacts of these efforts given the limited funding, and hopefully, help to stimulate more interest in industry and in other other ways to try to raise funding, like, venture capital and things like that.
Great. Well, I'm going to circle back a little bit for a last question for you. And, you've done work on male contraceptives, specifically vasectomy, and indeed we've collaborated in the past in that research area. Do you see the foundation investing in novel male approaches anytime in the near future?
That's right, Laneta. As just so the viewers know, I guess one of my very first projects when I started working at what was then AVSC was on a vasectomy study in Mexico with FHI, which then led to maybe, I don't know, an 8 or 10 or 12 year collaboration on a series of vasectomy studies with Laneta and others at FHI. So, I've always believed that we could do more in the field to support vasectomy services and to develop other male methods. And, I'd say that we are currently supporting some of that work in the early discovery portfolio that I mentioned. Some of that is looking at things that may eventually lead to a non-hormonal contraceptive for men. And also, again, in line with that idea of developing products that are informed by a deep understanding of users or potential users' preferences, we're supporting a study that should be getting underway soon to assess demand for male contraception and attitudes about male contraception among men in Africa, Asia, and the US. And this study will provide insights into men's preferences for different attributes of a male contraceptive and those trade-offs. Earlier I was talking about those potential trade-offs that women make, but here we'll be looking at trade-offs that men might be willing to make around different characteristics of potential new products. And we'll use all of this data to develop some demand forecasting and impact modeling. And one of the things that's really exciting to me about that particular study is that we will also be engaging female partners of those male participants to see if we can assess their attitudes about male contraception and, kind of relationship level trade-offs that they might make if they knew that their partner was using a contraceptive. How might that affect their use of contraception? Which I think will also help us do some modeling about how a male contraceptive might affect modern contraceptive prevalence rates. And so we will use those results to help guide our investments and decisions around supporting more in male contraceptive R&D. And we hope that the data will inform funding and R&D decisions of other stakeholders and donors who are either already working in the male contraceptive R&D space or interested in it. So stay tuned for a little more on that sometime, maybe middle of next year if everything goes smoothly.
Yeah, it sounds great. That sounds great. I know it's always the question that's on people's minds. It's probably the first question that you get on many of these discussions. So, well, Mark, I've just had such a fun time having this exchange with you, and I thank you so very much for the opportunity to do this interview and for joining us today on the CTI Exchange. And we will be tracking very closely progress as we go over time. And finally, again, congratulations on your new position.
Thanks so much, Laneta. It was my pleasure.
Thanks.